Broadcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Verino. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on this episode, I'm going to talk about 4 models that I have outlined in my new book called The Leadership Bridge: How to Engage Your Employees and Drive Organizational Excellence. And these 4 models, among other things in the book, really work on how do we develop ourselves individually. If we don't know ourselves, it's hard for us to lead others. What are behaviors that we can model to build better relationship bridges with those around us? How to understand what resistance is in others, why people resist. And then lastly, how do we leverage some of the research around setting better goals? What is missing? These are the models that I use with my clients. These are models that I use in my own life, and I know they work. And I know they'll work for you too when they're consistently implemented. So let's get into it. I've had a number of conversations with individuals around leadership, specifically challenges around how do we manage multi-generational departments? How do we manage remotely? How do we keep culture? How do we drive performance? How do we help with burnout? A lot of these challenges that are out there right now. And while I don't have the answer for all of them, what I did want to talk about is really 4 different models that I've developed that I use in my work. They're all in the book, The Leadership Bridge, that was published about 7 weeks ago that you can get on Amazon. I'll make sure that there's a link to it as well. But I wanted to touch on each one of these just quickly as an overview. They go more into depth in the book, but to give an idea of how do we as leaders start to address a lot of these things that are going on. And I believe that there are behaviors, there are approaches that we can take that will really create a better environment. And this really is about engaging employees and driving organizational excellence. That's really what we're trying to do, but it only happens through developing better behaviors. And the first place that we need to start with ourselves. So the whole first part of this book is around a lot about emotional intelligence, especially self-awareness. How do we develop that? But also, how do we develop a sense of well-being or happiness in ourselves? And I use a model called POWER that I created. And it's an acronym for 5 different researched behaviors that help us to really develop more happiness and better well-being in us. And the acronym deals with, again, 5 activities. So praise is about finding ways in the morning I find best to think of at least 3 things you're grateful for and write them down. The O in that model is about doing something for somebody else during the day. The W in that model is about writing down what went well for you. At the end of the day, I find is the best because then we bookend our days. We start out in a place of gratitude and we end our day in a place of writing down, or maybe it's at least thinking about what did go well during today, right? That's really important. The next is around exercise. And it's finding some space, if you can, on a daily or every other day basis, but something consistently where you're doing something active for yourself. And there's a lot of research, again, around each one of these, and I go into deeper in the book. This POWER model, you can actually get off of my website and sign up for what's called the POWER Journal. And that's a journal that was created that goes over in more detail each of these activities. The last one is relaxation in the POWER Journal, or in the POWER model that I talk about. And that's about finding just a brief period of time, maybe practicing things around mindfulness or breathing, but it can be as little as 2 minutes that we do it, where we're trying to focus on just being present where we are. So that's the first model that I talk about. And again, from a leadership standpoint, how does that impact a lot of those other things that we talk about? Dealing with other people multi-generationally, helping people with burnout. Well, if you think about it, if I'm in a better place myself, I'm more confident probably in who I am. That allows me to deal with other people and the challenges that I might be faced with them. So something important for us to think about. The next thing that I want to talk about is cables. And that really is, I would say, the umbrella to a lot of what I do. And these behaviors that I talk about are all well-researched. And if we think about it, every relationship you have with somebody else, imagine that it's an individual bridge. And cables really is about 6 behaviors, individual behaviors that help to increase the strength of this bridge by adding individual cables to this bridge. So the first is around congruence. Well, as leaders, we need to walk the talk. It's as simple as that. What we say and what we do needs to be in alignment, whether it's our organizational values or other personal values that we espouse to the group or say that we stand for. If we're not doing them ourselves, we lose credibility. And next is around appreciation. And that's not only recognizing people for what they do, but also recognizing people for who they are. Now, when we talk multi-generationally, appreciation becomes very important because it's about looking at the other generations that are out there. I'm a Gen X. If I'm dealing with somebody that's Gen Z or Gen Y, or a boomer, any other generation, or maybe my own generation at times, but it's about really trying to be in a place where I'm trying to appreciate their experiences, where they've come from, what things they've been going through. That's so important, right? The next is around belonging. And that is about creating a sense of relatedness, as is talked about in David Rock's model, SCARF. We need to create this environment where we feel connected with each other, and we don't have that. So if we go back to the multi-generational, or if we go back to how do we build culture, if people don't feel like they belong, it's easy for them to detach and not feel any sense of loyalty or need to stay when we don't feel as though we belong. And I would challenge that the greater the sense of belonging we can create, the more we're going to be able to keep our top talent within our organizations, because people don't want to leave. They're not leaving for a little more money. The research is clear on that. It's not to say that if you're paying less than everybody else in the same field, you're not going to lose people. It's saying that if money is not an issue, if money is well dispersed throughout your industry evenly in terms of how people are paid, they're not leaving for a few more dollars. They're just not doing it. So the next, we talk about listening, critical skill. And I talk about in terms of 4 different ways that we need to listen. So we listen with our ears, what people say, tone of voice. We listen with our eyes, watching body language, what people do with their bodies, facial expressions. Then we listen with our minds, and we listen from the standpoint of curiosity. What somebody else is saying really what they mean? Or is there more to it? Or is there less to it? I'm reading too much into this, but we need to be able to listen with our mind. And then lastly, we need to listen with, I would call, our heart, or a sense of empathy. And that's about listening to somebody else as though the roles were reversed. How would I want them to be listening to me? We need to be able to do that. That's the listening cable that we build. The next is empathy by itself. I think it's something that is vitally important. Again, think about it from a number of these things that we've talked about, helping people manage remotely, understanding what it's like to work remotely and why the need might be there and what the challenges might be when that happens. Empathy is vital to being able to lead and build better teams. The last one is around specifics. That's the S cable that we talk about. And that's about setting clear expectations and also holding each other accountable. I hear so much about, this generation doesn't work as hard as the next. I think most of it is BS, to be honest with you. I have a number of nieces and nephews that are all in that sort of millennial age. I can't think of one of them that I know that isn't wanting to work hard and do a good job, and they're driven. It's understanding what their real needs are. And I think from a standpoint of how do we do this within organizations, I think we need to do a better job when we hire people, and probably when we're out there recruiting people, is doing a better job of setting clear expectations of what's going to be expected when somebody comes to work for this company, and then making sure that we have people that can take ownership in what those expectations are, and that we hold people accountable to those. That when people aren't living by those, that we're bringing that to their attention, or they can bring it to our attention when we're not doing it. So if you can see here, as it relates to cables, it's almost like we've circled back to the beginning, right? About congruence, walking the talk, in alignment. When we set clear expectations and we're congruent with them, we've sort of closed the loop on this thing. Cables is, without a doubt, I think one of the strongest models that you can use in terms of building better bridges with those people on your team. Those behaviors that I talk about there, that's what creates engagement. That's what drives organizational excellence, is a byproduct of the engagement that we provide when we do that. So the next model that I talk about here is more on the side of how do we get people to say yes to our requests? right? So there's a lot of influence. There's a lot of research around influence. I want to talk about it from the standpoint of why do people resist first? Why do they say no? Because I think we need to understand that first. In the book, I talk about this model called GREAT, and I look at 5 different reasons or resistors that people have. The first one is goodwill. People don't say yes to us because they think like we don't have their interest in mind. What we're asking them to do benefits us, but it doesn't benefit them. That doesn't work. The next is around reactance. And that's about when we push too much or our personality or the way that we ask something of somebody is abrasive or rubs them the wrong way, then we will naturally get resistance. People will not want to go where we're asking them to go. I go deeper into this in the book and talk about personalities, how personalities, understanding different personality styles, and I use DISC as a model, can really impact why people might react to us negatively when we're asking them to do something. Critical for us to know. The next in this model of GREAT, I talk about expertise or experience. Do I know what I'm talking about, or have I relayed that or conveyed that to other people around me? The next is around apathy, when people feel like the way that we're doing things is fine, don't need to make a change. It's going to be hard for us to get people to buy into maybe going into a new direction. We need to understand that. And the last in the GREAT model is around trust. Do people trust you as a leader? Cable certainly goes a long way developing trust. And we need that. If we don't have that, people naturally will resist where we're asking them to go. So that's great. And again, each one of these things that I'm talking about now, I go into deeper detail and give stories and references behind them. And also at the end of each of the chapters, I give these bridge builders that there are challenges or things that you can do to reflect to how to get better. The last one I want to talk about is around goal setting. Performance management comes into play. I think managing remotely can come into play. Many within organizations are probably familiar with SMART goals. I had to use them for a number of years. I think there are some valuable parts to SMART goal in terms of how they're used, but I think overall they're too cumbersome. I don't find them smart or intuitive. And oftentimes I feel like they're just done as a check the box exercise that they're never really used. So what I did was I created a model called SET. And SET really is a refined version of SMART with, I think, one very important difference. And that's the E in this model. So SET stands for specific, emotional, and time-bound. For goals, we need to be specific. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And the time-bound is, when are we going to do this, achieve this by, or maybe if it's an activity that we're going to continue to do, maybe it's how many times we're going to make sure that we do it in a week. So maybe it's running, that I'm going to make sure that there's really not an end date. I'm not going to stop running on December 31st, but maybe I'm going to make sure that I run 3 days a week for 3 miles. That's my goal. The key is the E in this model, the emotional. And that's about the why. And to me, that's the piece that the SMART format misses in many regards, because what I've done with the E in this is done it along the lines of root cause analysis, where I've asked you to ask the question 5 times, why you want this goal. So I'll quickly say, if I were to talk about losing weight, which isn't very specific, I would have to say, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. And then if I would say, well, why am I going to lose 10 pounds? Well, because my son is entering junior high and he's going to play football, and I'd love to be able to coach him in football, but I'm not active enough to do that right now. So I need to lose those 10 pounds. That's why, because I want to coach him in football. Well, why do you want to coach him in football? Well, because he's getting older. We're having less time together. This gives me an opportunity for us to have one-on-one time together. Why is one-on-one time important for me? Well, because he's going to be in high school soon, and I'm going to see him even less. And I know that by the time they're 18, if you look at some of the statistics, that about 95% of the time that I will spend with any of my children is by the time they're 18 years old. Well, why is that important for me to spend that much time with him? Because then he's going to be in college and out of the house, and I'll see him even less. And I want to build a relationship with him that is for when he's an adult or outside of school. Well, why is that important to you? Because if I don't do this now, that legacy, this ability for us to take our relationship on a new level, I won't be able to go back. The time needs to be invested now. So that's the 5th why, right? So I've gone from just losing 10 pounds to really a legacy with my son of why I want to lose that weight. The importance of that is that then go into the kitchen and there are oranges and Oreos sitting there. I'm more likely to go for the Oreos. I'm more likely to go for the oranges than I am for the Oreos if I think to what the real why is. And that's often the thing that prevents us from reaching our goals is our why is not strong enough. So the book I go into and I talk about as an example, for me, I think I started the leadership bridge 8 years ago. Now, the why for me was always strong enough that I kept coming back to it. It got pushed out, the timeline did, but I never walked away from this fully. The why was strong enough for me to want to write this book. So those are the 4 models, again, that I go deeper into in terms of how you really can leverage these, but all of them play an important role in how do we develop better teams, better cultures. We can reduce burnout in organizations. We can cross generations in terms of how we communicate. In many regards, even though I talk about this as a bridge, on some level, it's a Swiss Army knife. That there is a tool within this that can deal with many of the issues that you're faced with. And I would argue most of them within an organization. And they don't have to be used all at the same time, but there's something there that can create better teams. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you have an opportunity to read the book. Certainly, I've given you enough here that even if you didn't, try and implement one of these models that I talked about. I guarantee you they work. If you apply them consistently, they will work. So there you have it. The Power Journal is about helping us lead internally. Cables is about behaviors that help us to build better teams, better bridges individually with those around us. The Great Model is really about understanding why do people say no. The better we are at understanding that, the more effective we're going to be in getting people to say yes. And then how do we set better goals, not with SMART, but with set? How are our goals set? I hope you found this beneficial, helpful. It would mean the world to me if you'd pick up the book on Amazon. There's a lot of benefit in there, and I know it works. So until the next episode, I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best. Peace.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.